So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where the G20 goes to war with the rest of the world. Now, if you don't know what the G20 is, it is the Group 20, and it's made up of many different countries across the world. As you can see here, there are 19 sovereign countries, which I have highlighted, and there's also the European Union and the African Union, who are a part of the G20. In this scenario, I've decided to exclude the European Union and African Union because I believe that it would make for a more interesting and fair scenario if they were left out of the G20. And yeah, so if you do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and show some support. You can subscribe. We're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Make sure to leave any suggestions and your input in the comments. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into this scenario. This is kind of a jumping. Like, this isn't necessarily fair for the rest of the world. So let's just go ahead and get right to the fighting because this is going to be bloody. But in the G7 video, you guys did state that you want to see a G20 video, and here we are. Now, I didn't think that the jumping would be this bad because I didn't really, fully know that all of these countries were in the G20. I mean, I knew that there was obviously 20-ish countries in the group. However, I didn't know that they were, the 20 strongest countries in the world. That makes sense, though. We're going to start in the Americas, and we'll make our way over to the rest of the world. The only thing is with the Americas, though, that the American portion of this video might be over before we even get to the old world, because the 4 strongest countries in this combined continent, or even 5 strongest countries in this combined continent, are all on the same side versus everyone else. I just realized that French Guiana is not the right color, so let's fix that before Brazil invades their own ally. But now we can continue on with the carnage. Mexico will invade up into Belize and Guatemala with the help of the Canadians and the Americans. They then push down and around into El Salvador, working their way through Honduras and into Nicaragua. After entering this country, they make a swift push right towards their capital, take it, and meet the border of Costa Rica, who doesn't have a military, so let's go ahead and brush through them, and then meet the border of Panama, who gives a little bit of resistance. However, it is mostly all for nothing because they get steamrolled by the big 3 of North America. Now on to South America, where things will go a little bit slower, but the result will mostly be the same. Uruguay gets the jumping of a lifetime as both Argentina and Brazil work together to wipe out the small South American country. These two then focus on taking out Paraguay, making connection between the two a lot easier for future purposes. Brazil will start a campaign into the Guianas. This goes extremely well as they take out Suriname and the main country of Guyana. And now what's left in South America are the medium, kind of mid-strong countries. All of the weaker countries at this point have been wiped out, and it remains with the final 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 countries. Anyway, the North Americans make a landing in northern Colombia and work their way around the coastal areas of Colombia, pushing towards both of their capitals. And let's take a break from South America before it gets too ugly. We'll go over to Africa next. Now, South Africa is the strongest country in southern Africa, so they're going to take out Lesotho and Eswatini and move up into Mozambique without much resistance. Where they will be facing resistance, however, is on the border of Namibia, where some stronger countries are lined up, like the DRC and Angola, but these guys are further away, meaning that it's going to take longer for them to get down to the border of South Africa, giving them time to expand their front. Now, up to northern Africa, we have a lot of these stronger countries like Egypt and Algeria, as well as Nigeria. These guys, I'm not too sure what they would be focusing on. Egypt is probably busy with Saudi Arabia and coordinating with the Middle East. Algeria might be coordinating with Europe, and Nigeria is probably free to go down and help, although who knows, they might be helping with South America, although that's mostly a lost cause at this point. So let's go ahead and say that Nigeria is sending forces down to fight against South Africa. Meanwhile, these two are kind of hung up with other parts of the world. Skipping on over past Europe to Oceania, Indonesia and Australia make quick work of Papua New Guinea. And for the sake of not hanging on it, we're going to go ahead and wipe out all of Oceania, as well as New Zealand. They don't really stand a chance against Australia. I think that's safe to say. Apart from that, Malaysia will be invaded by Indonesia. Singapore is wiped out, and a few days later, so is Brunei. Malaysian claims on Borneo are completely lost, and it is only the, is this the mainland or is that the mainland? Who knows? This part of Malaysia is wiped out next, though. Slowly but surely, the Indonesians and the Australians start making their way up the tip of Southeast Asia towards Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries. They will be slowed and stopped, however, as these guys have set up a pretty good defense for each other. Sri Lanka is wiped out by India. North Korea starts to get invaded from both ends, both by South Korea and China. Mongolia is starting to get split into 2 by Russia and China. And now over to the more interesting areas like Europe and the Middle East. We'll start with Europe. We have the Benelux falling over to the red team. Germany is able to take out Denmark, and the UK is able to take out Ireland. The North Americans and the Western Europeans coordinate with each other to take out Iceland, and as well as Greenland in order to establish better connections with each other and to use these areas for their resources and any other advantages that they may give. Now over to Western Europe, where we see the Eastern Europeans start an invasion of Germany. Now this goes pretty well. They focus in on the Bavarian and northern German areas where Berlin is, and it goes good for a couple of days. These guys are also able to topple over Kaliningrad and to make small gains into Russia, hurting the Russian morale. Over now to the Middle East, we see Turkey start to invade Syria. They droop down into Lebanon and start to approach Israel, who quickly responds, pushing back the Turks. India will start an invasion into Pakistan. This will quickly be stalemated, and the world has now fully gone to war with itself, as the two sides are fully clashing. Now remember, the Americans are mostly concerned with the Americans, the Europeans are mostly going to be concerned with the Europeans, and the Asians will be mostly clashing with themselves. So really, once a certain area of the world falls, for example, South America will be falling pretty soon, then the opposing side is in for some trouble, because that means like countries like the United States and Brazil will be sending their forces across the world in order to bolster their side. So Western Europe is already pretty strong on their own, but then once America gets there and reinforces them, the blue team might be in a little bit of trouble. So beginning with that process, the North Americans will now take the entire coast of Venezuela, pushing deeper into the country and making it collapse. Colombia is up next as they lose their coastal area, and with the help of Brazil, maybe, jungle, kind of confusing, but they wipe out Colombia. And slowly but surely, over a couple of months, we see South America begin to fall over to the red team. Eventually, the last country remaining is Chile, who poses a very hard challenge for the red team, as their geography is literally mountain. Santiago is, however, captured, and this will spell defeat for Chile as they start to lose control over their land, and eventually the military forces begin to surrender over to Argentinian and other South American forces. Eventually, the red team completely takes out the Americas, and now we see the effect that I was just talking about. The North Americans will most likely send their forces over to Europe to help out Western Europe, whereas South America will most likely send their forces to South Africa in order to help them against the entire continent. Speaking of that entire continent, they are now pushing back with the help of troops from every single country. South Africa starts to get invaded by their own continent and are forced to attempt to stalemate them, as any aggressive gains which they once had are now lost, except for Lesotho. Lesotho's kind of cooked. They can't really move. Now back over to Southeast Asia, the Chinese will work together with other surrounding countries to wipe this place out pretty quickly. Now as we know, China has the infinite people glitch going on. India has that too. So really, these guys are able to wipe out this part of the world with a lot of ease. Indonesia and Australia eventually begin their push up again, and from here it is the erasing of Southeast Asia. I don't know why I said that so weird. That was quite strange. I'm still talking weird. Next up, Bangladesh is on the chopping block. They will get cut up by India and China, and Bhutan and Nepal, the Himalayas are there, but let's just skip that plot point. Also, Bangladesh, very populated, very capable of defense. Mongolia will be the next country to fall, and following them is going to be North Korea. The same point that I made about Bangladesh is also capable for Taiwan, however, we'll be wiping them out. And then the Filipino Islands, they will be the last country in this part of the world who are on the blue team and have not been invaded. Unfortunately for them though, there's just too many countries going at them. You have the likes of Australia, Indonesia, China, Japan, South Korea, maybe even India invading you. So it's not very fair for the Philippines, and unfortunately they will fall. So just like that, the eastern part of the world is now completely red team, and it is really just the middle that is left to invade. Africa is like the continent that they're pretty much up against, that in Europe. At this point, it's basically Oceania and the Americas plus half of Asia versus the rest of the world, and that matchup is not fair. But Russia is caught lacking on their front line against Eastern Europe, as the Eastern Europeans start to push into Russian territory and threaten major Russian cities. Ukraine is seen having the most success taking over Crimea and pushing out Russian aggressors, and even starting to claim a lot of this land down here for themselves. Russia, however, is determined not to lose access to the Black Sea and push back against Ukrainian forces, reclaiming important naval areas, but are unable to push back the Ukrainians at this time, and that's mostly due to the fact that they are unrolling a plan, and a steamrolling plan at that, to basically walk through Kazakhstan and wipe out this part of the world with the help of China and India. Turkey is also in on this in a certain way. They will invade into Georgia and knock them out of the war. Next, they will go into Armenia, and no comment. They will then move on to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan would probably pose the most threat out of all three of these countries. And, you know, even Iran would be helping them out. So let's not wipe them out of the war just yet. Maybe they have some defensive stats going for them, maybe not. But Turkey isn't really focused on this too much anyway. They are more so focused on taking out Syria and invading into Iraq. Saudi Arabia is focused in on taking out Yemen, ironically enough. They do it pretty well and take out the country, but do start to see some resistance when going against Oman and the UAE. Qatar is taken over by them, but it comes at a large cost. And for the most part, Saudi Arabia will be playing defense. Italy will now start to invade up into the Balkans. Flashbacks are ensuing. Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia all fall over to Italian forces. Montenegro is next, and they then start an invasion into northern Albania, pushing over into Kosovo and into parts of Serbia. France will start to attack Spain, and you know, there's a big mountain range here separating the two, but for purposes, we will be ignoring that. France is able to take over Catalonia. They also take over the 3 Spanish islands in the Mediterranean, and with the help of British forces, start to make very good movements into Spain, reaching towards Madrid. Back over in Central Asia, we have the red team continuing to plow right through Central Asia, as Kazakhstan is knocked out of the war, followed by Tajikistan and then Kyrgyzstan. Reverse that, Tajikistan fell last, Kyrgyzstan was first. Doesn't matter though, because Uzbekistan is the next to fall, followed by Turkmenistan, and now the red team has reached the border of Iran and Afghanistan, which are going to pose a challenge for them. But there's also Pakistan that they need to worry about. So for now, this front line will be stalled out, and they will hold a stalemate with these 3 countries and not advance any further. Instead, they'll focus in on Eastern Europe. Now, in the red team, there's probably like 4 or 5 leaders, maybe 6, being the US, Brazil, Australia, India, China, Russia. I would say maybe even the UK or France. In the blue team, who really is the leader? You can make a case for Nigeria, Egypt, Iran, maybe Poland or Spain, maybe Finland, Pakistan. Israel probably not would work at all. I don't think Israel would. Honestly, I think Israel would just get kicked out of the blue team, which would be kind of funny. But yeah, who is the leader country of the blue team? Who knows? So there really isn't an exact like country that the red team is targeting. Instead, it's more so of just wipe out the blue team and you know, get land from the peace treaty. But American troops are now arriving in Europe, and Spain is unfortunately seeing the most of it as they are wiped out by multiple superpowers. These superpowers then rearrange their focus to the east, taking out Switzerland and Austria, pushing back the Eastern Europeans and Germany, and starting a frontline advance into Austria, Czechia, and Poland. Some task force will move up towards Norway, making a landing in the country and taking out Oslo, then moving into Sweden and securing the Baltic Sea for the red team. They'll then reach around and wrap up to Stockholm, and these 2 countries at this point have been crippled as all of their more populated areas are under control of the red team. The Finns will hold out, and they're able to keep the Russians out. However, the Western Europeans are now approaching their border from the west, and this could serve as a challenge for the Finnish to fight off a 2-front war. Back down south, this is really the only front line that the red team is worried about right now, so they are going all in on Poland, capturing Warsaw, liberating Kaliningrad, and wiping the Baltics out of the war within a couple of weeks. This connects up Russian and American forces, who are the predominant leaders of this front, and from here, it's over for Europe. The red team starts to swiftly take over many countries in the span of a couple of weeks. Serbia is the next country to fall, followed by Albania and North Macedonia, and now there's just a couple of strong countries left. Belarus is maybe, no, I mean Moldova is the weakest of them all, but then maybe Belarus. So Belarus is wiped out by Russian forces, mostly. Ukraine is up next. They serve a pretty big threat to the Russians, but they're already kind of familiar with this land because of real life events. The Turks will begin to capture Greek islands, and the Western Europeans will now push down into Greece, capturing Athens and quickly wiping this country out of the war. Probably a lot faster than they realistically would be wiped out, but like I said, it's just kind of belt the ass for Eastern Europe, so yeah. Ukraine is the last Eastern European country to fall, unless you're counting Finland as Eastern European. But even Finland will start to show signs of cracking, as they cannot handle the 2-front war. They're eventually split at a certain point and lose their northern half. This land up here, we're just going to color for simplicity's sake. Anyway, Finland will continue to hold out for the next couple of weeks, but for the most part, Europe has been completely captured, which means it's time to go for the rest of the world. More specifically, South Africa has been receiving more and more aid from other countries outside of just South America, and this enables them to push back all of the aggressors within their country, even though they technically are the aggressors. They recapture Eswatini and start to invade back up into southern Mozambique, and with the help of foreign aid are now focusing in on wiping out Botswana, and next after that Namibia. Over here in the Middle Eastern area of the world, Russian troops now start to flood into northern Iran, as well as help from other parts of the world, including Western Europe and even the Americas. Iraq loses Baghdad and proceeds to surrender, followed by Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. Israel, I don't even know what they would do. Cyprus will surrender, Kuwait will surrender, and much of the Middle East will now follow suit. And we're seeing at this point the realization of the blue team that they obviously will not be winning this war, because simply, you know, the 20 strongest countries in the world are enough to really mess everyone else up. So like I said, Finland will surrender, and a lot of random countries in Africa will start to surrender, but those countries are mostly Western Africa, and you know, following suit, eventually the idea of surrendering just starts to spread around to everybody. All of the major countries surrender, and after Nigeria surrenders, Africa as a whole will surrender, leaving just these three left. Iran will probably be the first to go. Afghanistan, I'm not too sure what would happen there. Pakistan would probably very hesitantly surrender eventually. And yeah, that's the end of this war. So the G20 will obviously beat the world in the massacre, ugliness, massacre, not good, bad, gangbang. Country jumping is not good, it's bad. Frown upon it. However, that is the end of the scenario, so let's go ahead and take a look at a hypothetical peace treaty. I probably won't go too crazy with it because there's so many countries, but let's just take a look. All right, so like I said, I didn't go too crazy with it, so we'll go ahead and break it down pretty quickly. The United States will annex the Caribbean, Canada will annex Greenland, and Mexico will get a little bit of Central America. You can see that South America is only owned by 4 different countries at this point, being Brazil, Argentina, French Guiana, and then a new kind of puppet vassal mixture that is owned by the G20. It's just called South America, G20 South America, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And then there's also a similar thing in Central America made up of the remains of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. Now on to Southern Africa, we can see that South Africa just simply annexes all of Lesotho, Eswatini, and Botswana. They probably could have gotten a little bit more. Maybe they would have gotten Namibia, but I left them out. But now going over to Europe, we can see that Iceland is annexed by somebody, maybe the UK. The UK, speaking of them, they take over Ireland. We have Iberia being mingled together into a department of the G20. France annexes Luxembourg and Belgium. We have Germany annexing Denmark and all of the Netherlands. Italy will annex Slovenia and Croatia. And Russia will pretty much do their best Soviet impression, taking in the Baltics, taking over Belarus and Ukraine. Probably could have done something with the Nordic countries. Probably could have done something a lot more with Eastern Europe. It would not look like this. There would probably be a lot of departments like such. Over now to this area of the world, similar thing. I didn't really do too much with it, but there would likely be departments. India, I forgot to give them land, so let's just give them Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, maybe Nepal. China, they basically recreate the Qing dynasty with Mongolia and Taiwan. Korea is reunited. Australia will annex all of New Zealand and Papua New Guinea. And as for Indonesia, I don't know why they look like that, they take over all of Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore. Saudi Arabia will take over some portions of the Middle East, and Turkey will do the same. And yeah, that will do it for today's video. So if you did enjoy the G20 versus world scenario, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Remember, we're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Make sure to leave your input in the comments, leave any suggestions that you have in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And of course, thank you to all the super fans. This includes Mr. Bonk7, Patrick Clauser, Switzerland Lowell Productions, German Edits, Georgie Badev, Kylie Speaks Plays, HammerToad45, Connor the Gamer, Poland Country Ball, Yakko, Nevada Garbage Trucks, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.